Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of Comparative Literature in Germany. And on this channel I discuss literary theory, Gothic and Romantic literature, fantasy and science fiction literature classics dating back to ancient times. But today I brought a truly Gothic book. I'm talking about this one, Goth: A History by Tolhurst, one of the co-founding members of the band The Cure. And it is a mixture of a personal memoir and a cultural critique, as well as a celebration of the Gothic subculture. And as the new album of The Cure has recently been released in November, and I have released a video on the question what is Goth, and also been talking about Gothic music in there. If you're interested, I will link it up here and down below as well. I thought this could be quite fitting time frame to talk about this book that has been released in late 2023, so about a year ago. I will give you an overview of what the book is about, what Tolhurst covers here, why I think the book is special, who could be interested in the book, what could have been improved, and also read a few of my favorite quotes to you. So I hope you enjoy the video. So as I mentioned, Tolhurst is one of the founding members of The Cure and contributed immensely to its early sound. The band was founded in 1978, so in the late 70s, when the Gothic music emerged from the punk music. And Tolhurst was first playing the drums until he was switching to the keyboards in 1980. And he stayed a member of the band and has been touring all around the world with the band together until 1989, when they were recording their landmark album Disintegration, when his struggles with alcoholism became very vivid and his substance abuse began to impact his performance on stage. And because of his low performance on stage and his overall struggles, his relationship to the band members also deteriorated, especially to the front member Robert Smith. And after that he left the band in 1989, and later on he also founded other bands and has continued making music. But this book focuses mostly on this time of how The Cure founded itself and how they were touring the world and how this Gothic music scene emerged, and how they were also connected to other Gothic music bands, and what made the sound and his impressions of the whole scene so vivid and vital. And this is basically what this book is about. It's a mixture of a personal memoir and a cultural critique. So on one side you have this first-hand impressions of a very important member of this Gothic music scene, who has been navigating this whole chaos of the music industry. He has been dealing with addiction and recovery, as well as depression. And he has a very personal view of the music and the literature. And he tells very personal anecdotes, gives impressions of his own taste in the music, what he thought makes it special, also the music of other bands, how there were connections with the Gothic literature, and gives an overview of how all of that evolved and emerged. At the same time, it is also a cultural critique and commentary on Goth as a subculture in total, so how Goth was inspired by the literature and the arts, how it also emerged as a fashion and a lifestyle eventually, so how all of this just changed over time, and how people saw themselves as Goth or also didn't, and what did it even mean to be Goth or to feel Goth, and how does that sound, that Gothic sound like? These are all questions that he's tackling in this book, and he ties quite a few threads together, so you get a better impression of what Goth can feel like. And I think that's quite a different approach to what I try to do in my video on what is Goth, because I've been trying to show the varieties of the ways that this term is and was used throughout history, And he's more interested in what does it feel like to be goth and to hear goth and to dress goth and stuff like that. So people who have a connection to the darker side of life, the darker things in life, also questions of why do we even live, existentialism, nihilism, and also melancholy and difficulties in life, struggling, trying to find meaning, connections to death, how and why are we even here on earth. Such questions are deeply moving and they are often discussed in Gothic literature and Gothic music, and this is part of what he's talking about here. He also comments in the afterword of the book on his writing of the book, and he says that first he was trying to choose a traditional approach and writing a kind of comprehensive encyclopedia of the times of starting in the 1970s, but then he quickly decided against it because he didn't want to cover everything. He wanted to give his personal view on things and rather tell how certain anecdotes and certain points in history of the Gothic music scene and also certain places were shaping this whole style and the whole culture, and not so much giving a complete overview. And that is good, I think. He reflected on that, and I think it's also something that is quite difficult to do in general because you can almost never cover everything, and it would have also probably not been as fun to read as this book is, because he has a wonderful writing style. And so that you can get an impression of his writing style, I will just start with the author's note because I find that quite interesting to see. And he says, "Before Goth there was anarchy, and the mystery of anarchy begat Goth. What was the mystery of anarchy? Isn't Goth just the mysterious part of a nihilistic rebellion called punk? Or is Goth the true golden thread weaving its way from the past until now and ever onwards to outsider infinity? What interests me is the why and the wherefore. The rest is mere detail. From the doors of perception to the cure and further, I'm searching for the essence that has always resonated with dark seekers. Some identify as Goth, others do not, but we are all the same tribe. These are my people." Victorian ladies would carry a small black and white photo or miniature portrait in a locket as a remembrance of love lost. This book should fulfill that same melancholy longing. So from this author's note, you can already see that what Tolhurst does here is looking back. He's looking back at the very beginning of the Gothic subculture. He starts with the origins of Gothic music in the late 1970s and also talks about how the Cure was founded and what they were thinking and feeling when finding this band, and how they've grown and were able to find their own sound and play in front of broader audiences over time and filling broader stages. And he's also talking about the ties to Gothic literature, which I found most interesting because I'm most interested in the literary questions. So he's talking about how the writing of T.S. Eliot, for example, or Camus and Sartre, the nihilistic and existentialist writing of those, as well as the writing of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, inspired Goth and resonated with the feelings that were discussed and felt in the music. That is quite interesting to see, because I think usually you overlook, or people tend to overlook, this connection that is quite closely connected to literature, and also that the lyrics of the songs often pay tribute or have ties to the Gothic literature themselves, or not even just to Gothic literature but to literature in general, such as, for example, in the new album on the song I Can Never Say Goodbye. Something wicked this way comes, which is actually a quotation from Macbeth, as you might know from Shakespeare. So there's lots of quotes and connections to Gothic literature, and this is what he's also talking about here. But mainly he's talking about this, the sense, sensing the Gothic, sensing this, the yearning for the dark sides of life, to understand and to thrive within those, and not only talking about everything happy and fun, but also looking at things that people tend not to want to look at. I think you can also just try to see for yourself whether the authors that Lord Tolhurst mentions here, so Sylvia Plath and Saxton, T.S. Eliot and Camus and Sartre, as well as, for example, Kafka, whether they resonate with you and their writing resonates with you, or they don't, because with me they resonate a lot, but the music also resonates with me, same as the fashion style, which is quite a lucky match in the end. So I think it's great that he's covering that in such great detail, but he's mostly focusing on the music. So he's talking about the prototypes of Gothic music, and he's talking about the bands The Doors, Suicide and Nico, as well as Scott Walker and Alice Cooper, of course, and also about Mark Bolan and David Bowie. And then there's the part 2, The Eternals. It is about some of the most iconic Gothic bands, such as Joy Division, Bauhaus, Susie and the Banshees, and of course The Cure themselves. In part 3, called Legion, he's talking about the Spiritual Alchemists, the Cocteau Twins, Wired, Sisters of Mercy, The Mission, The Damned, and also The Trees, and All About Eve. And then he's also talking a lot about the Bat Cave, which is the London club that was the place to be for people living in Great Britain, especially in London, to come and to celebrate the Gothic music and culture. And he's also talking about Depeche Mode and about death rock emerging from the Gothic music. And in the end, in chapter 7, he says he has this chapter called We Are Many, where he's talking about more other bands and movements and like broadening his view in a way. And later in chapter 8, he's talking about before and after goth, so about Gothic fashion and about how Gothic people are also growing up and getting older, and how they still remain in that lifestyle, and they just evolve within it, and they take it with them into their aging, and not just say that's something they've been interested in when they were young, but it's something they are still interested in. And these days, if you're going to a festival or a concert or a party, then you will definitely see people who are the members of the original goths, if you will, that have been going to the concerts in the 80s already and are still celebrating this subculture, and Lord Tolhurst is one of them as well. And he grasps that spirit very well in the book, I think, and that's pretty great. That's what he does very, very well. And I want to draw upon one example from the start of the book, in which Lord Tolhurst describes the political climate in England when goth emerged in the late 1970s, and he writes, "In England, the punk explosion was a direct response to the austere times brought on by the crippling recession and the totalitarian political climate that Thatcher and her cronies inspired. Yes, we were bored teenagers, as the advert sang, but we also agreed with the Sex Pistols. There was no future for us. We had to make our own future, and initially punk was the only attractive alternative." So here you see that as teenagers they were drawn to punk because it was the only kind of rebellion they would have in that time, when there were such strict political things going on, and the only way you could feel like you could break out of was the music. The great thing that he also describes is that he saw that people could just become artists in that way, in that time. Before, they were growing up and thinking and also being taught that only very talented people could become artists. But then they were just trying out making music and just trying to play instruments, to sing, to just do something, and they just didn't stop. And he also talks about other bands and other people who did the same and just were there and just explored things, and they just found their sound and their tune and their whole style over time. And that's capturing in a great way from the beginning of this book the essence of goth in a way, I think, because as I mentioned in my other video on what is goth before, it's just the great thing about this whole subculture is that it lets people be. It lets them be who they are and how they want to be within that whole space. And it's such a peaceful subculture. Everyone is just who they are. They celebrate the same things oftentimes, but they also can evolve in many different directions. The styles is so different. The music has also so many facets. It's so diverse by now, and it has been changing all over time. But still there's this essence in a way also that you're drawn to this darker side of things. And as I don't want to go into too much detail on all the chapters and all the bands, I just want to summarize quickly the best and the worst things about the book. The first and best thing I want to mention is that it's such a personal, insightful book, and also the first-hand experience of Lol Tolhurst, knowing the band members of other bands such as Susie and the Banshees, and just casually meeting people such as Tim Burton, who was making these gothic movies such as Edward and the Scissorhands, for example. And just knowing people in that scene and basically knowing almost everyone, because the scene only evolved over time, of course. And he can just tell you so many fun and also thoughtful anecdotes that make you think and reflect. And that's amazing, because just how many musicians actually sit down and write cultural history and personal memoir at the same time. That's amazing, I think. So it's really a very authentic experience that you get here. The second thing is also that he puts all of his own experiences and memories into this broader cultural framework of Gothic music and Gothic literature and the whole subculture and how this emerged and what makes it special. And I think that is very rich and wonderful, because it gives you so much more insight and depth as a reader. And he does that very, very well, I think. And the third very great thing is that he emphasizes community and identity in such a great way. So identity of being goth, feeling goth, and also, as he said in the introduction in the author's note, that some people feel goth and some don't, but they're still part of the scene, whether they identify or call themselves goth or not. They can still be part of that and still share the same values, the same taste in music or fashion or literature or whatever, and they can still be goth, and you still feel a connection between. And that is also how this whole music and the whole lifestyle is still so relevant these days, and even becoming more popular over time sometimes, because people still love to go to concerts, parties, festivals. They like to dress in Gothic fashion, and it's such a vibrant, lively spirit, although connected to dark and dead things as well. And I think these are the most wonderful things about this book. So this mixture that Lol Tolhurst does very good between the personal memoir and the cultural critique and the general celebration of the vivid subculture. I think his musical focus is a little bit narrow, so he could have also maybe included more modern bands, and that's also connected to the second critique that I have, that it lacks a little bit of a more outside of Britain perspective, because he's talking a lot about London and Great Britain and the British bands. Of course, it makes sense because it emerged in Great Britain in the late 70s, and he's also talking about the US and touring the US and playing in little schools and high schools and like getting over time a greater audience, and then also being able to play bigger concerts, but he's still very much focused on this Anglophonic realm and space. And I think it could have also been interesting to see, for example, Gothic culture in Germany, because that's something he didn't cover at all. Also, when talking about the literature, he's mentioning Kafka, but he's basically talking about British and American authors, and I think that could have been a little bit broader. Otherwise, I also reckon, of course, that it's his own personal view and the way he was inspired and he was thinking about all these things, so it makes sense that he only covers what inspired him and was interested him. And the last thing is that it's a little bit too heavy on anecdotes, so it's quite a lot of anecdotes, and some chapters are very smooth to read and some are packed with anecdotes. For example, I really enjoyed the chapter in which he was reflecting on leaving the Cure because of his mental health issues and his alcohol problems, and then going into the hospital that was called the Priory, that was looking like Strawberry Hill House, built by Horace Walpole, that I've been talking about in other videos as well. I will blend in a picture of both. And he was first thinking, am I in Strawberry Hill House here? What's happening? It's like a Gothic mansion, this white beautiful building with these towers. And then he was even meeting other Gothic music people and sharing friendship and sharing this time healing there. And I found that was very insightful and personal and lovely to read, but there's also other sections that are very packed with anecdotes and it's a little bit difficult to read. But I think this would be my main critique, and I think overall it's great because it's talking about more than just the music and the fashion. It's talking about the subculture as a whole, and also like how it is resilient, how it's not just getting swept away like other subcultures. For example, he mentions hip-hop, which also emerged long ago, but is not as popular, as explorative maybe, as well as goth. If you can compare that, he does that, but he does not compare it in detail. Just a thought, because I feel like Gothic culture is so much more vibrant and also diverse, as you see with the Gothic fashion, literature, architecture, music. It's also lovely to see that like the essence of being goth and feeling goth is that you feel sadness, for example, you feel drawn to the dark side of things, you might also even feel melancholy, or that not everything is always happy and cheerful, but you recognize that and you find a meaning in it, and you even manage to turn that into something beautiful and to heal from it or to live within it and to try to understand it. And that's basically what a lot of Gothic music is about. If you listen to the lyrics and think about it, I think so much is just making sense of the darker side of life. You can just think about it, and even in literature that's the same, so that's very, very important, I think. So who is that book for? I think in general you could say everyone who's a fan of The Cure or any other of the iconic Gothic music bands. Also people who are just generally interested in the subculture, and also especially in the music, who want to get an overview or like a light insight into it that is not very like a broad overview that you get for like mentioning every single band emerging in a certain time frame, every different kind of sub-style of the Gothic music or anything like that, but rather like a personal and also critical view from one of the most iconic members of the Gothic subculture you can find these days, I think. So whether you're interested in learning more about the music, how this whole style emerged, how the sound of the different bands is also described by another member of another band, also his view on The Cure and how this all emerged, or if you're also interested in the connection to literature and the general view on life and what makes it meaningful to be or to see goth, to hear, listen, dress goth, whatever, I think that could be a read for you. I think it's a good read, I can definitely recommend it. And he's also been writing his personal memoir, Cured. I think it's been released a few years ago. I haven't been looking into that yet, but I am planning to in the future. So to finish off this video, I hope you enjoyed this insight and overview of my view on the book. I would like to know, are you part of the subculture? Do you like to listen to the music, to The Cure, to another band? What's your favorite band? Do you have a favorite memory of going to a Gothic concert or festival maybe? What do you think is the essence of goth for you? Why do you enjoy this channel maybe? Why do you enjoy Gothic literature? I think I would love to hear about that in the comments and we can start a little discussion. And I hope you look forward to all other videos coming on Gothic music, literature, subculture. I hope you enjoyed the video a lot and I will see you in my next videos and have a nice day. Bye bye.